Today I wanted to do a video that is a tutorial on how to play the Minuet in G major number 822 from this book, which is First Lessons in Bach. Now, because there's been different versions of this book over time, sometimes these pieces are switched. I know that in some books, the piece that's number 7 in my book is actually number 6 in some other books, and probably vice versa. So if number 7 in your book is actually in G minor and it's not in G major, then you just want to go and find where actual number 7 is. In my book, like I said, the piece we're going to be working on is number 7, but it might be in a different spot. So you can just look at the sheet music here in my video and match it up to the piece in your book that is the correct piece. I'd imagine that this piece still would be in your book. It might just be number 8 or number 6 or something if it's not number 7. So just look around. It should be in your version of the book. But what I'm going to do in today's video is I'm going to show you the sheet music. I'm going to walk you through and show you anything kind of interesting in the piece that we haven't seen before, anything that might kind of provide an unusual challenge or something that might be confusing. So I wanted to walk you through that, and also if you don't have your own version of the sheet music, you can also just kind of like put the sheet music up on screen on your phone or whatever and use that. And then I'm going to show you on the keyboard how to play the piece note by note, finger by finger. And I'm also going to have the sheet music there as well on screen so you can see it and follow along with the sheet music on the measures as I'm playing on the keyboard. So hopefully that will help you. So let's get started. Let me show you a close-up here of the music, and I'll just kind of walk you through it and show you anything that you might want to pay attention for that might be new since the last pieces that we've looked at. So let's take a look here at the first line of the piece. So there's a couple things we want to talk about. First of all is simply the title up here, and the subtitle mostly is that it says, a study in contrasting the effect of the major mode, number 7, which is the one we're looking at, with that of the minor, which is number 6. Now number 6 is over here, and you can't see it, but it's on the other page. And number 6 was in the key of G minor, whereas number 7 is in the key of G major. So it kind of gives you an idea of what minor sounds like when you play number 6, and it gives you an idea of what major sounds like when you play number 7. Now they're not necessarily kind of like a major and minor version of the same piece, but they do definitely have similarities, and you can definitely tell that number 7 is major and it sounds happy, and number 6 sounds minor and it sounds a little bit more sad and a little bit more dismal. It has that kind of minor sound. Another thing I want to talk about here is the metronome speed, which says that a dotted half note is supposed to be played at 66 beats per minute. So what that means is if I grab my metronome out here, it's over here. If I put the metronome on 66, which I have it at, you can't see that, but it is, that means that at the beginning of every measure, because a dotted half note in 3/4 time is equal to one entire measure, at the beginning of every measure, you will have a metronome click. So that means that there's going to be 3 quarter notes per measure. So between every single metronome click, starting on the first click and the 2 in between until the second one, is going to be the quarter notes. Like that. I mean, hopefully you can kind of imagine how that's going to sound. So at the full tempo, this piece is rather fast, and that makes it very fun to play. But of course, when you're practicing on it, you don't actually have to play it at that full speed when you're practicing on it. Just take it nice and slow and just wait until you get really comfortable with the piece before you try to play it that fast. Another thing, someone in the past has made a similar notation to what I just talked about, showing that 3 quarter notes equals 1 dotted half note, which is kind of interesting. Just kind of shows a visual representation of what I'm talking about there. Now everything here in the first line is really pretty straightforward. We do have an interesting thing here called portato, which is kind of like a more mild version of staccato. Staccato means to make the notes very disconnected and very brief, and to just basically make them sound disconnected. But portato means it kind of makes it a more mild staccato. It just kind of means make them disconnected, but don't make the notes too brief and too percussive. Just kind of leave a little bit of extra space in them, a little bit more extra space than you would if they were simply normal quarter notes. So that's something we want to watch out for. I think that's the only instance of portato here in the piece, when the piece does repeat and go back, so technically it's twice, but this is the single instance of it in the piece. So that's just something to watch out for. Everything else here in the measure is really straightforward. There's literally just 2 notes playing at a time. There's no chords. There's nothing crazy going on. So the first line here is really pretty straightforward. So let's move on to the second line, which gets a little bit more interesting. So here's the second line of the piece. You can kind of see that 7 up there that was the first line. So that right there is the bottom of the first line, and this is the second line, and you're probably looking at this. If you've never seen this before, you're probably wondering, what is that? What do I do? It looks scary, but it's actually not that scary at all. Basically, this is a first and second ending, and it's kind of like a fancy repeat that has a second ending onto the end of it. So normally what would happen is, let's imagine that this bracket here with a 1 underneath of it, and also this little miniature measure here is gone. Let's imagine all that isn't there, and we just have a repeat, which is the thick double bar line with the 2 dots on the top and bottom. So a repeat sign, I've talked about this before in my music, but a repeat sign basically means you play through the song, and when you come to the repeat, you either head back to the beginning of the piece and play it again to the repeat, or sometimes there will be a backwards facing repeat later on in the piece like you see here. So if there was this somewhere earlier in the piece, you'd go back to starting at the beginning of the backwards facing repeat and then play through until this repeat. But what happens here is it's a similar effect, but what happens the second time around is instead of playing this again and then moving on to the next part of the piece, you want to skip this measure, which has that 1 over it. You want to skip over and go directly from this measure to the second ending, which has the 2 over it. So what happens, like I just said, is you play through the piece. You can only see the left in here, but you want to start at the beginning of the piece, play it through, and then when you get down to here, which is the first time around, stop here and then repeat back to the beginning of the piece. Play it through again, and the second time around, you want to skip this measure that has the 1 over it and jump directly from here to the measure with the 2 over it, and then from there you continue on in the piece. And that is basically as simple as it is. The rest of the piece here is also pretty straightforward. We've got a couple of C sharp, so for a few measures in the piece, we're actually in the key of D major instead of G major. But other than that, it's really pretty straightforward. So let me show you the last couple of lines of the piece, which also are really simple. So this here is the third line of the piece. You can see there that was the second line. You can see the first and second endings there. So this is the third row of the piece, the third line. As you can see, it's really straightforward. We have an accidental, we have crescendo, as well as a forte. Now the dynamics in this piece, and pretty much Baroque music in general, is really rather optional because Bach at the time did not have dynamics on any of his keyboard instruments. Clavichords weren't able to do dynamics, harpsichords aren't able to do dynamics, and organs kind of are because you have different stops that you can pull in and push out to get different dynamics, but really his keyboard instruments weren't able to do the level of dynamics that we have today, where you push a note harder and it's louder and you play it gently and it's quiet. So these dynamics would have been added in later by an editor, so if you don't want to do them, you don't actually have to do them. And if you're playing this instrument, if you're playing this piece on a historically accurate instrument, such as a clavichord or a harpsichord, you can just completely forget about doing dynamics because those instruments really can't do any kind of dynamics at all. So just forget the piece has any dynamics if you're performing this piece, or really any Bach music or Baroque music, on a period instrument. But if you're playing it on a piano and you want to put the dynamics in, you can go ahead and absolutely feel free because it does add a really nice dimension to the piece. But as I said, it's pretty optional because Bach wouldn't have written this in, and so it's just pretty optional. But as you can see there, that third line there is really pretty straightforward. There's nothing crazy going on. So let me just quickly show you the fourth line, and then I will show you how to play the piece. So here's the last line of the piece. As you can see, it's really simple. There's nothing crazy going on here, but one thing I do want to mention is that we have a little bit of dialogue down here that says numbers 6, 7, and 8, after being studied separately, may be grouped together for performance. And that's because in this book, numbers 6, 7, and 8 are actually part of a suite that contains multiple minuets, and numbers 6, 7, and 8 are actually in that suite. So they're meant to be performed together kind of as a single piece, perhaps with a pause in between, but they are a single unit of music. Kind of like how a sonata has multiple movements, this suite has multiple minuets in it that you can play kind of chained together. So that's why it says down here numbers 6, 7, and 8 can be grouped together for performance, but you don't have to learn them all as a single piece. Of course, they do have a kind of a repeat sign there at the end, and that's kind of like the end of the piece. Number 6 has a double bar line at the end, indicating it's the end of the piece. So you can study them each as their own separate piece, and then when you chain them together, you can still think of them as being independent pieces, except that you're playing them all back to back, number 6, 7, and 8. So I just wanted to mention that because that's just something kind of interesting. But now let me show you how the piece goes on the keyboard. I'm going to also put the music up on the music desk. You can see it and follow along. I'm going to have the measures numbered, and I'm going to be calling out the measures by number if I remember to do that. Sometimes I forget. But I'm going to show you what fingers to put on what keys, and hopefully this helps you guys out. So let's go to that and let's begin. So here we are at the piano, so let me take you through the first line of the sheet music and show you how it goes. As you can see, I've got the first line of the sheet music here blown up real big. As you can see, it's absolutely huge. So hopefully you'll be able to see that, and you can follow along with me here. So I'm going to start off here in measure number 1, and what we want to do is, first of all, don't forget that we do have one sharp in the piece. I didn't mention that earlier, but we do have an F sharp that we have to pay attention to. So every time we see an F sharp, such as here in measure 3 and also here in measure 1 on the left hand, we want to make that a sharp, which is going to be the black note directly to the right of F. So this is F, so F sharp is here. So every time you see an F, make sure to play that note instead, unless the music says otherwise, which I don't think this one does. But anyway, to start off the piece, what we're going to want to do is start off in measure 1, the first note, with D in our right hand with our pinky, as we play this G with our thumb. Just like so. Then we're going to want to change our right hand to our 4th finger on D as we play this F sharp that I mentioned earlier. Then we're going to want to put our pinky back on D as we play D in the left hand with our 4th finger. And that is measure 1 of the piece. Now, the reason you want to change your pinky on this D from 5 to 4 to 5 again is mostly to get into the habit of playing a repeated note over and over again with a different finger. And in this piece, that's not so much of an issue. You could play it all with one finger, just like so at the tempo the piece wants you to, and it wouldn't really be an issue. But if you were playing a very fast piece that wanted you to do a single note played over and over and over again, particularly if it was a long time, playing that note with one hand would get very tiring and also would take a lot more energy playing with one finger. Regardless of what finger it is, doesn't matter if it's your pinky or a thumb. You have to move your whole hand and you have to move your whole arm up and down to do so. Now, if you're playing that repeated note with multiple fingers, see how much easier that is? Your hand does bounce up a little bit, but most of the work is put into your fingers. And it does take some practice to kind of get it right and kind of predict when the piano is ready to play the next note, and then you can play it as soon as possible. But with a little bit of practice, it becomes much easier to do that than this. Here it's uneven, my whole hand is shaking up and down, and it's just a lot harder to play it with one finger than it is with multiple. So it's just a good habit to get into, playing a repeated note over and over again with multiple fingers rather than just one. But let's move on now to measure number 2, which is going to start off here with B in the right hand as we play this G with our thumb, just like we did in measure 1. So we're going to want to play those together, just like that. Then we're going to want to play A in the right hand as we play this D with our second finger. Go back up to B in the right hand, and then play these two Gs together, just like that. And that is the end of measure number 2. So let's move on here to measure number 3. What we're going to want to do is play this A with our second finger, just like so. It's kind of a weird sounding interval, but what we're going to want to do next is play F sharp and D, just like that. F sharp in the left hand with our second finger, D in the right hand with our pinky, which is a much nicer sounding interval. So it obviously, what's the word I'm looking for? It resolves. That's the word I'm looking for. The note here will resolve to that, which is a much nicer sounding interval. So from here, from this F sharp, we're going to want to go down to E, like that. Then we're going to want to play F sharp again with C on top, which again will resolve here in a minute. That actually kind of resolves. And then we're going to want to play here in the first note of measure number 4, G in the left hand with B in the right hand, which definitely is a pleasing sounding interval. From here, we're going to want to go down to G in the left hand, just an octave below it. Then we're going to want to play A in the right hand as we come partway up here to D, just like that. The last note of measure 4 is this C with our middle finger in the left hand. And that is the end of measure 4. So now what we're going to want to do is move on to measure number 5, which is done so by playing this fourth finger with, this B with your fourth finger as we play this D with our right hand pinky, just like that. Then we're going to want to kind of just let that B just kind of let go and sit there as we play this little walk down the scale. We're going to want to play C. We're going to want to play C, B, A, and then G, just like that, starting off with C on our fourth finger and just walking down. So starting off with measure number 5 on our pinky here. That's as easy as measure number 5 is. Now measure number 6 is also rather similar. Instead of starting off on D like that, we're going to want to start off with C and E like this. And then from here you can do a couple of things. You can start this E with your third finger, like so. Put your second finger on B, put your thumb on A like the sheet music says, and then put your fourth finger over. Or if you want to, you can also play your fourth finger on this C and make that same little pattern here, just like you did in the 5th measure. So what that would sound like is this, and what would look like is this. Sorry, with the 5th measure. So if we play pinky on E, and then put your fourth finger here, just like you did for measure number 5, or what you can do is put this, just like this. This is measure number 5, and then for measure number 6, you're going to want to put your pinky on E, and then put your middle finger here on C. Go down, put your thumb on A, and then cross your fourth finger over. That's the way the sheet music says, and I like it, but you could also, I believe, do it that alternate way. But as you can see, that is the end of the first line of the piece. As you can see, it's really rather simple. So let's move on to the second line here of the piece. So now let's take a look here at the second line of the piece. Now whatever fingering you decided to use in measure number 6 doesn't really matter, but whatever fingering you did decide to choose, you're going to want to end up in measure number 7 with your middle finger on this F sharp in the right hand. Now what can change, however, is the fingering you use here for the left hand, and either way really doesn't really matter. Both of them still work fine, but one of them is a little bit easier for me than the other way. And so as you can see here in the sheet music, it says to play a thumb on this D down here. But what you can also do is play your second finger there for a couple of reasons. Number one is because in measure number 5 we had a B, played with our fourth finger. In measure number 6 we had a C, played with our middle finger. And in measure number 7, your second finger is already kind of there to play that D. So you can do that if you want. And then also what's kind of nice is in measure number 8, we jump down to this G with our fifth finger. And then we have that same 3-note run from B to C to D, and your fourth finger is already going to be there. And on top of that, reaching back up here to this G, after that, because you're going to want to repeat back to the beginning after this, and you're going to want to play this high G, like that. Playing that actually is a lot easier if you have your second finger on this D, like that, rather than if you have your thumb here, right, like on measure number 7, and then you go here, then you go do, 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 and then you jump, oh, you have to jump up like that to the beginning of the piece, which generally isn't considered okay. The sheet music doesn't have anything written there, so it's pretty open for interpretation whether or not you want to play with your thumb or you want to play with your second finger. Myself personally, I like the second finger method better for a couple of reasons. One, your finger's already there, and B, it's easier to reach up to this G. But whatever finger you want to do there is perfectly fine. I just wanted to talk about that a little bit because there is a tiny bit of variance that you can do in the fingering in those couple of measures if you want to. But let's start back off here with measure number 7 and kind of keep on going through the piece. As I said, you're going to want to have your middle finger here on this F sharp and your second or thumb down here on this D. I'm going to play my second finger because this is what I usually do. Then in the right hand, you're going to want to go to E, go to D with your thumb, go back up to F sharp, and then you're going to want to play your fourth finger here on this G. Now that one that's above that G actually isn't a fingering. As you can tell, it's a lot bigger than the fingering markings down here, and it's actually referring to the first and second ending that I showed you earlier in the video. So you're going to want to play your fourth finger there. You could play your thumb, I guess, if you wanted to. And you actually totally could if you really wanted to, but that one isn't necessarily a thumb writing. It's for the second ending. You could play your thumb if you wanted to, and then that would make jumping up to the D here at the beginning of the piece a lot easier, but you could just play it with your fourth finger if you wanted to. I'm pretty sure that's what I do usually. So anyway, once you get here to measure number 8 with that fourth finger on G, you're going to want to have your pinky down here on G as well, just like that. And then you're going to want to play your fourth finger on B, third finger on D, C, second finger on D. And then from here, you're going to want to repeat back to the beginning of the piece. Now, when you repeat back to the beginning of the piece and play the piece all the way through, when you come here to measure number 8, you're going to want to skip measure number 8 and move on to measure number 9. And then you're going to want to continue on to the rest of the piece. You're going to want to skip measure 8 the second time around, then go straight from measure number 7 to measure number 9, which, as you can see, is really simple. It's literally just 2 Gs. So instead of the second time around, instead of playing this, starting with measure number 7, and then repeating, you're going to want to play this and continue on in the piece. Hopefully you were able to follow that, and hopefully that makes sense. Again, just go from 7 to 9, play 9, and then move on in the piece. So from here in the piece, starting off with measure number 10, we're going to want to play our thumb here on this G as we play our second finger up here on B. Then we're going to want to go up here to E. Then we're going to want to play this E down here. And this is actually kind of the weirdest measure in the piece. It's very simple, but it has a much different feel than the others, and it just kind of has this strange, like, out of place kind of feel. Because it's a very open feeling measure, and there's not a lot of notes going on when everything else here has been really pretty rhythmic and had lots of 16th notes, eighth notes, but this one only has quarter notes and half notes, so it's a little bit more open feeling, and it sounds and feels kind of different. From that B, we're going to want to play E, then play E down here, just like that, like I did a couple of times before. And then we're going to want to play this C sharp here with this A with our thumb, just like so. Then we're going to want to play this E with our B, if that made any sense. We're going to want to play that E with our second finger as we play this B with our second finger. Go up to C sharp, then play this A down here, together with that A with our thumb. From here, we're going to want to play this F sharp in the left hand as we play this D. I'm in measure number 12 now. That's the first note of measure number 12. Then we're going to want to play this E with our thumb as we play this E in our right hand, just like so. We're going to want to do like a cross-under technique in the left hand there from F sharp to E, like so. The last note in measure number 12 is going to be this D in the left hand with our second finger as we play this F sharp in the right hand with our fourth finger. From here, we're ready to move on to measure number 13, which we're going to want to do by playing this A in the left hand with our pinky, which is kind of already there, and we're going to want to play this E in the right hand with our middle finger, which also was already kind of there. Play D with our thumb, cross our middle finger over to C sharp. Then we're going to want to play, after we're going to play this E along with that C sharp, just like so. And then we're going to want to play this B, and then we're going to want to play two A's together, just like that. And the last note in measure number 13 is going to be this G, and that is the end of that line of the piece, which was the second line. So now let me show you the third line here of the piece. So now let's take a look here at the third line of the piece. What we're going to want to do is start off in the left hand here with our middle finger on F sharp as we play this A in the right hand. Then from here in the right hand, we're going to walk down the major scale, just like that. Then we're going to want to move our right hand up to B as we play this G with our second finger. Walk down the scale again. You could use your fourth finger on this G or your third finger. Really doesn't matter either way, but what we're going to want to do is start off at the beginning of measure number 15, play that B, then play our middle finger on G, play F sharp, walk down the scale again, just like we did before, which is why you can use that same fingering if you want to. From here, we're going to want to play A with our thumb as we play this C sharp in our right hand, like that. Play A in the right hand, play the octave lower A in the left hand, as we go back up to C sharp, and then we're going to want to play this D in the right hand, and the left hand, sorry, with our middle finger, as we play this D in the right hand, actually the right hand, with our fourth finger. Just like so. So left hand with the fourth finger, left hand with the middle finger, right hand with the fourth finger, just like that, both on D at the same time. From here in the left hand, we're going to want to jump up to D, like that, go down, play B, play A, and then we're going to want to cross our thumb under to get to G as we play this D in the right hand with our fifth finger, just like so. Then we're going to want to play C, go down to B, play F sharp and A, just like so. Then we're going to want to play measure number 19. We're going to want to play G and B here, like this. Play A, play B, play G, just like that. I actually played that D there on the B. It's supposed to be lined up with the A there, like so. Then play B, play G, just like so. And that's how measure number 19 goes, and that is actually the end here of the third line of the piece. Let's check out the fourth and final line of the piece. So let's take a look here at the fourth and final line of the piece, which we're going to want to start off with our thumb on A in the left hand as we play this C natural up here on the right hand in measure number 20. Play F sharp in the left hand with our middle finger, play G with our second finger, as we play that C, go down to B, and then we're going to want to play this D with our thumb, so we're going to want to do this crazy cross under technique. Kind of more of like a cross your thumb under and jump kind of a thing. So we're going to want to play again that G together with that C, go down to B, and then in measure number 21, we're going to want to play that D with our thumb. Then from here, we're going to want to jump an octave lower with our pinky to get to the lowest note of the piece, which is that D. Jump back up to D here, walk down to C, and then we're in measure number 22 now. So we're going to start off measure number 22 by playing this B with our middle finger as we play this D with our pinky, just like that. Then we're going to walk down the scale. That might sound familiar. We kind of had this exact same motif earlier. Then we're going to want to play this E up here with our pinky. Then we're going to want to do our C on middle finger here, play second finger on B, play thumb on A, play fourth finger on G, and then we're going to want to play this D with our our middle finger. I messed that up. We're going to want to play this D with our thumb as we play this F sharp with our middle finger. That 24 there, I was looking at that and it messed me up. That's why I said fourth finger. So we're going to want to play that F sharp with our middle finger, just like so. And then we're going to want to play E, play D, play F sharp again with our middle finger as we play this low D down here. And then we're going to want to play two Gs, just like so. And that is the end of the piece. Now from here, as you can see, there's a repeat sign. So if you wanted to, you can go back and play that second section of the piece over again. And then when you get to it a second time, you can finish the piece. And once again, there's a little note down here that says numbers 6, 7, and 8 can be grouped together as a performance if you want. So once you know numbers 6, 7, and 8, if you want to, you can chain them all together to make a much longer piece that you can play for fun, or you can play in public, or you can play for your friends and family, whatever you want to do. So hopefully you found this video to be helpful and informative. But that is the Minuet in G. That was a tutorial of how to play the piece and what fingers to put on what notes of the keyboard. So hopefully you found this tutorial video to be helpful. I know that a lot of you guys seem to be really enjoying this video series, and if you're following along with it, if you're enjoying it and you're finding it helpful, I'm so glad you are, and just thank you very much for following along. Now, I probably should have mentioned this before the video, but if you want to hear how this piece goes in its entirety played at the full speed, I have a performance video on my channel that you may or may not have already seen. If you haven't seen it and you want to learn this piece, listening to the piece played as a performance will really, really help you to understand the piece when you're learning it, because you'll kind of know how it goes, you'll recognize the melody as you're learning it, and it just makes learning the piece a lot easier. So if you haven't seen that, go check it out already. And if you want to, you can also hit the like button on this video if you found it enjoyable, and also maybe go check out some of my other content, because I've got more tutorials that you might find interesting, and I also have lots of cool reviews on keyboard instruments like pianos, organs, harpsichords, and other neat things. So if any of that sounds cool, you might want to think about subscribing, and if you do subscribe, make sure to hit that notification bell to be informed of all of my future uploads, whatever they may be, because hopefully you will be interested in them. And if you do all that, thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.